The Silent Neighbor, Part 1. The mysterious noises. It was a cold autumn evening when Sarah moved into her new apartment in the city. The place was cozy, but there was something about it that felt off. She heard whispers about her new neighbor, Mr. Green, who lived next door. He was always reclusive, never seen outside, and the building manager rarely spoke of him. For weeks, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Sarah had settled in, unpacked her things, and even started making small talk with the other tenants. But then, the noises began. It started softly, a thud here, a creak there. At first, Sarah assumed it was just the building settling. But one night, as the clock struck midnight, she was woken up by loud banging coming from the wall between her apartment and Mr. Green's. She brushed it off as nothing more than an old pipe or a heavy object falling. But the next night, the banging returned. It was louder, more frantic, almost like something, or someone, was trying to get out. The Silent Neighbor, Part 2. Uncovering the truth. After a few more sleepless nights, Sarah decided to confront Mr. Green. She knocked on his door but received no answer. The door was slightly ajar, and a chill ran down her spine as she pushed it open. The apartment was dimly lit and eerily silent. Her heart raced as she walked deeper into the apartment, calling out his name. The furniture was covered in dust, and the air smelled stale, as if no one had lived there for years. But then, she noticed something strange. In the corner of the room, a small, locked cabinet stood. It was out of place, shiny, untouched by dust. Sarah couldn't resist. She tried to open it, but it was locked tight. That's when she heard something. A muffled cry, coming from behind the cabinet. Sarah froze. Was she hearing things? Or was someone who shouldn't be there, trapped inside? The Silent Neighbor, Part 3. The Hidden Secret. Determined to find out what was going on, Sarah returned the next day with a locksmith. They managed to break open the cabinet. Inside, there was nothing but an old, faded photograph. But the photo made her blood run cold. It was a picture of Mr. Green, but there was something horrifying about it. He was holding a woman who looked strangely like Sarah, almost as if it was a photo from her own childhood. The woman was smiling, but her eyes were wide with fear. Sarah's mind raced. She had to find out more. A quick search of the building's history revealed a chilling detail. Mr. Green was a former tenant who had disappeared years ago. He was last seen with a woman who had also vanished. But that wasn't the worst part. In the basement of the building, where Mr. Green had once lived, there was a hidden room. No one knew about it until now. The last chilling detail Sarah discovered was a note inside the cabinet: "The truth lies beneath." These 3 parts set up a spooky and suspenseful atmosphere, with Sarah slowly uncovering the terrifying truth about her neighbor. If you plan to turn this into a viral story, keeping it realistic and eerie, with a mysterious twist, could definitely get people hooked. You said, turn this into a viral story, keeping it realistic and eerie, with a mysterious twist, could definitely get people hooked. ChatGPT said, here's a revised version of the story that could go viral, with more suspense and eerie elements added for maximum engagement. The goal is to make it feel realistic and relatable while keeping the mystery alive, drawing readers in for more. The Silent Neighbor, Part 1. The mysterious noises. I never believed in ghost stories, at least, not until I moved into my new apartment. It was supposed to be the fresh start I needed after a tough year. But something was off the moment I moved in. The place was cozy, sure, but it felt like I was being watched. The landlord was vague when I asked about my neighbor next door. "Quiet guy. Doesn't come out much," she said with a shrug, her eyes shifting nervously. But I didn't think much of it. After all, it was a busy city, and people kept to themselves. The first few weeks were fine, until the sounds started. It began subtly, small thuds in the walls, like something or someone shifting. At first, I assumed it was the old pipes or the building settling. But then, the noises grew louder, more insistent. One night, around midnight, I was jolted awake by what sounded like something heavy being slammed against the wall, over and over again. I froze. The wall between my apartment and Mr. Green's. That was where the sound was coming from. I convinced myself it was just old plumbing or some weird building quirk. But the next night, the same thing, but louder. I tried to ignore it, but I couldn't sleep. The Silent Neighbor, Part 2, Uncovering the Truth. It had been a week of sleepless nights when I finally decided to confront him. I knocked on Mr. Green's door, but there was no answer. I knocked again, this time a little harder. No response. The door was slightly ajar, and I felt this sudden chill run through me. It was like the air shifted, as if something, or someone, was waiting just beyond. I hesitated for a moment but pushed the door open. Inside, it was strange. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust. The furniture looked untouched, as though no one had lived here in years. The place felt wrong. I called out to Mr. Green, but there was no answer. It was silent. Too silent. And then, I saw it, a small, locked cabinet in the corner. Out of place. Too clean. I walked over, feeling an undeniable urge to open it. It didn't make sense. Why would someone lock away something so innocuous? When I tried the handle, it was locked tight. That's when I heard it. A soft, muffled cry. It was coming from behind the cabinet. I backed away, heart pounding. Was I hearing things? Was it a pet? Or was someone in there? The Silent Neighbor, Part 3, The Hidden Secret. The next day, I returned with a locksmith. He reluctantly agreed to break open the cabinet for me, though I could see the unease in his eyes. When the lock snapped, we slowly pulled the door open. Inside, there was nothing, except for an old photograph. It was yellowed and faded, but there was no mistaking it. The image was of Mr. Green, but he was holding someone. Someone who looked exactly like me. My breath caught in my throat. How was this even possible? The woman in the photo had the same smile, the same dark eyes, but there was something wrong about her. A strange, haunted look in her eyes. And then it hit me, the woman was standing in front of a building. Our building. The photo sent shivers down my spine. I felt like I was being pulled into a story I didn't understand. But then, I found something else, a slip of paper folded neatly under the photo. The writing was barely legible, but I could make it out, the truth lies beneath. I was losing control of my thoughts. I rushed to the building's records, digging into its past. That's when I found the chilling truth, Mr. Green had disappeared years ago. No one had seen him since. The woman in the photo? She was never found either. But the worst part? There was a hidden room in the basement, one that no one had known about, not even the landlord. No one had mentioned it when I moved in. And according to the building's old maintenance reports, the room had been sealed off. After the last tenant disappeared. That night, I went down to the basement. The door was hidden behind old boxes, covered in dust. I had to know what was inside. But just as I reached for the handle, I heard something. A soft, familiar knock. The same knock I had heard when I knocked on Mr. Green's door. I turned, heart in my throat. The door to my apartment was ajar, and the sound was coming from inside. The final twist, epilogue. When I entered my apartment, the air felt wrong, too still. The walls, the corners, the shadows. They all seemed to be waiting. The next morning, when the landlord came by to check on me, she looked terrified. She told me they had found Mr. Green's body in the basement. His fingerprints were all over the hidden door. He never left the building. But then, she told me something that made my blood run cold. The photo? The woman in the photo wasn't just anyone. It was the previous tenant,